You're all set, Jerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can live up to the billing,
No, you're world famous.
but I have been growing bromeliads for a lot of years, since I've been about 20. And so that's 60 years I've been growing bromeliads. So there's a few things I have learned over time. There's a lot more to learn as I go along. I learned a lot putting this presentation together because the dry growing bromeliads aren't something that I typically grow. I grow mostly the wet growing stuff. Oh, can we hit the lights? Can somebody?
Yeah.
I'm gonna see these a little better.
Second.
Awesome. So this is a picture of me in Ecuador. So it was taken where they actually grow. And this shows Guzmania sclerosa, which is not a dry grower. It is the opposite. It is a very wet grower. Where this plant grows, it rains every day. So, but it's my calling card, and that's why I have it up here. So how many of you have ever grown a bromeliad? Awesome. So then you all know what they are. So what's the two most common bromeliads?
Pineapple,
Pineapple? Anybody else?
Spanish moss.
And Spanish moss. You've seen my presentation. This, in fact, is pineapple. And I saw this growing wild in Ecuador. It is not native. There is a variety of pineapple that is native to Ecuador, but this one wasn't. This one was put into a field and then just gotten overgrown. It is native to Brazil and not to Hawaii.
Well, here's a bit of trivia. Why do they grow them in Hawaii?
Well, the climate is really great for it.
Well, also, there are no hummingbirds in Hawaii. They don't want
The
they
cross-pollination.
don't want it pollinated, they don't want it to develop seed.
And, well, I don't know that they can do it. Anyway, this is an example of a colorful pineapple.
Yeah, geez.
This one happens to be one called Ananas Supercharged. It's a cultivar that a friend of mine in Costa Rica grew, and it actually has pink fruit inside, but it tastes exactly like a pineapple. And of course, all of you know that if you just cut this plant off at the top, you can plant that and it will grow into a new plant for you. So, and that's one way to propagate things. They also produce offsets along the base of the plant. The other one that everybody knows is Spanish moss, Palansia usnioides. And a lot of people don't know that it flowers. In the bottom left is a picture of the flower. And when these are in bloom in mass, they are actually very fragrant. When it comes in bloom in my greenhouse, I have several clumps. And I know immediately that it's in bloom. I don't have to see it. But it's a greenish yellow flower. And you'll see in this picture, in this photo, all of this fuzziness on the leaves. You're going to see that a lot on the bromeliads that I'm going to show you coming up. And the reason is these glucose scales are actually absorb moisture and nutrients from the air. And they take and close up during the daytime and they open up at night. So the reason they do that is most of the time you get a higher humidity level at night than you do in the daytime. And in daytime, you want to preserve your moisture you've collected. So those trichomes close up and they open up at night. Now, you can't see them open and close. That's behind the scenes. They always look this silvery color, and that's what produces the silver, are all these scales. A little comparison of plants. This is a busy slide, but I use it primarily to show that the distribution of plants is not equal throughout the world. And I have Ecuador on here, and the reason I go to Ecuador usually once a year, sometimes once every other year, is because of the diversity of plant material. You can see on this that Ecuador has 25,000 species of plants. The entire United States has 17,000. Ecuador is about 2.5 times the size of Ohio. So that's a lot of plants in a very small area. And when you're going up and down the mountains, you go through wet terrains, dry terrains, intermediate, all kinds of elevations. So that's why you get all the diversity of plant material. That plus the fact that Ecuador sits on the equator. And a nice attribute of the equator is you get 12 hours of daylight every single day of the year. It doesn't change. So you get microclimates that develop because of the constant light and usually the wetness or dryness, depending on what it is. And so you can get very narrow niches of plant material that grow there. And this is true of the dry growing stuff as well as the wet growing things and everything in between. And that's why the tropics gets so much diversity. Now you'll notice that cacti, which you folks are familiar with, they have about 1,800 species that are known. Bromeliads are about twice that much. So there are more species of bromeliads than there are cacti. However, one thing you should note is the distribution of those species isn't terribly different between cacti and bromeliads. The cacti actually go a little further into South America and a little farther north in the United States, but they're both are families that are New World. So with one exception, there's one bromeliad that's found in Africa, and I believe there's one cactus in Africa as well. Yeah. So it kind of got cheated there. So no.
Possibly Sri Lanka too, but.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But more or less, this kind of shows you that the distribution overlaps significantly. So you would expect the plants to cohabit in certain areas, and in fact, they do. The genera that I'm going to talk about today are the dry growers, because I was kind of asked by you all to touch on them. And this is the primary genera of bromeliads that are what I consider to be dry growers. Now, the last one, Tillandsia, is the largest genus of bromeliads in the world. And there's 792 species in there, which is far more than most of the rest of them that might go up to 200 or so. But I'm going to talk about each one of these and their characteristics and show you some examples of them so that you can realize what they are. And I think a few of them might pique your interest. Let's start with this one, which is the Deuteroconium. This is a highly blown up picture of a single plant with its yellow flowers showing its pistil up in the top part. They're members of, they grow in Argentina, Bolivia, Paraguay, Peru, and Chile, and they're both terrestrial and xerophytic. So they'll grow on rocks or in the ground, usually gravelly ground. They're always spiny, very succulent, and the plant does not die after flowering, which is an interesting trait because most bromeliads are terminal flowers. They bloom out of the center of the plant, so when that meristem blooms, then that original plant will die, but it almost always produces offsets. There are some exceptions to that, but not true in the Deuteroconiums. So here's Deuteroconia longipetala. I took this picture in northern Peru, up around Cuelap. Have anybody been to Cuelap? One of the Inca, really ancient Inca ruins. Most of the Inca ruins are from around 1500, somewhere near 1600, 17. Cuelap is from about 100 AD, so it's exceptionally old. But this is a very dry area. This is a very steep rocky thing. And you can see that the foliage, it looks a lot like some of your succulents that you grow. And in fact, it is succulent. And it has the same characteristics in that the leaf tips almost always turn brown because they get flipped by something or run over or desiccated. And then they make it moisture and they'll fill back out again. So this is, you can tell that they clump together. And those farms are lethal. Here's the flowers. No wonder they call it longipetala. Very long yellow petals on this. And again, you can see the pistil. This is another deutericonia, very different. These plants, each plant's about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches in diameter. And this plant's probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years old. And it reproduces, and as it reproduces, it just tends to grow over whatever it's on. And it almost always takes a globe shape like this. And this particular plant very rarely flowers. People that grow it in the US don't flower it. It's hardy to about 20 degrees. So it's grown outside in the California area. Switching, this is the genus Dickia. I have examples of some of these up here. Again, it's a terrestrial xerophytic. This one is mostly present in central and eastern Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia. So it's mid-South America on south. So it's and they're always in a drier area, spiny and succulent, and they're self-seeding. The spines can face either direction, both either inward or outward on these. Another one of the Dickias. This is a terrible photograph. I'm sorry, I got it off the web, and when it blew up, I didn't realize it wasn't going to be clear. But this is Dickia Marnier La Pastoria. This is characteristic of the Dickias. From Brazil, it goes to about 10 inches across. This is a hybrid Dickia with a typical inflorescence for Dickias. It'll have either yellow or red and yellow combinations of flowers because it's trying to attract insects and in particular hummingbirds from some of the drier areas. Dickia fragrans. I actually have one of these plants up here, and the foliage really looks just exactly like this. It's a very glossy, purplish look to it with, again, the silver scales on the underside of the leaf, which is kind of an interesting touch. The inflorescence would be probably about 20 inches tall and have these, and it's called fragrance because there is a slight fragrance to the yellow flowers. This one I would have named a little differently. It's Dickia Michael Andreas. He's one of the bromeliad collectors and hybridizers. I would have possibly named this one Darth Vader. To me, it looks a little more like a Darth Vader type. Wow. And I really like this one. This is a hybrid that somebody made, a complex hybrid of two different species, and they're actually cultivars. So you're all familiar with cultivars. You can get a slightly different looking two species. One is slightly different looking the other, but they're same species. But one is maybe has traits of longer spines or a silver edge to it. But this plant grows to about 24 inches across. So it can be quite a spectacular specimen when you put it together. Usually the ones I've seen usually grow in about a gallon pot. So that's it's a different genus, but to me the foliage looks very, very similar. The difference is the flowers. The flowers, when you're doing genetics, and trying to describe species or genus have a big role to play on what you call them. This again is terrestrial xerophytic. It ranges from Texas mostly through Central America, and most of the species are in Mexico. So there's no overlap between the Dictyas and Hectias. The Hectias are further south in South America. These are up in Central America. The big difference here is these are dioecious plants, meaning that you've got male plants and female plants. And they have either male parts or female parts. And you have to have one of each to be able to get seed to set. This is Hectia marnier lapostoi. Here's an example of the dioecious flowers. Terrible, but the top one, you can actually see the stamens in it with the pollen, the yellow pollen, and then the lower one has only a stigma. So you have a single pistil with its stigma there. And so you need, and these are on different plants. So this is a photograph of two different plants. And the flowers that have both parts are called perfect flowers. So there's a big class. Other plants that are dioecious, some of them you have in your garden. Asparagus has dioecious flowers, which you may not know. And a few other ones, let's see, I have to look at this. Spinach and kiwi fruits are also dioecious. Hectia lanata from Mexico. This is, sometimes I put the elevation on because these are things that sometimes grow at higher elevations. This is probably, see, 2,400, that's probably 7,000 feet elevation. So it would be cooler. And oftentimes what you'll do is you'll get a big difference between daytime temperatures and nighttime temperatures. And some of these plants actually require that temperature difference. If you try to grow them in a mono temperature, they don't tend to fare very well. But that's true of quite a few of these desert type plants. Some of the ones you grow probably are like that. You know, they're able to take really cold temperatures at night and then really hot during the daytime. This is one lone species from Texas. Terrible picture, but it's Hectia texensis. It grows about 16 inches wide, but the flower stalk is almost as tall as, you know, chest height anyway. So it's a long, thin spike with flowers on it. This one's a little different. This is Hectia coalescens. It's called coalescence because of the coalescent nature of the thing, meaning it has stolons. The main plant is here, and the stolon comes out. You get a new plant, another stolon, you get another plant. So these are pretty easy to propagate. You just clip it off and hand it to somebody, let them throw it in the ground. But this is very beautiful foliage on this. It's a very handsome looking plant. Different genus, Orthophytum. This is, I saw this plant over here in the pot. It's a cryptanthus, but the foliage looks very similar to this Orthophytum, Orthophytum gherkinii. And this plant grows to about the same size as the one on the end of the bench up here. And the one on the end of the bench is an Orthophytum, but a different species. These are from eastern Brazil. They're native only to Brazil. The leaves have spiny edges, and there's about 64 species. The bloom is almost identical in every one. They get these clusters of green, very thorny type clusters, and then there's small white flowers in them. You can actually touch the one that's up here, and it'll give you an idea of Orthophytum heavy metal. This is a particularly nice type of foliage plants. This is one of the things I hate about these plants. All these spines. And you notice they face inward, so you don't get poked on the way in, you get grabbed on the way out.
Yeah.
Which is really bad, because then your tendency is put your finger in there further so you can get out. Guess what happens? You just get it in there even further and it still doesn't come out. So this is a particularly wicked plant. This is a photograph of the one that I have on the end of the table, but I grew it in better light. I grew it in really bright light. This year, for some reason, I had it hidden in the greenhouse and it survived. It's a real trooper, but it didn't take on this beautiful red coloration. And then this plant down in the corner, I'll make mention of, because that's a plant called Tillandsia raackii. That's the first plant I ever found. There was a new species, and Harry Luther from the Selwood Botanic Gardens named it after me. Since then, I found 12 other new species of bromeliads, and they're not all named after me. In fact, only one other one is. You tend to name them based on the characteristic of the plant, rather than after a person. And you don't get to name them yourself. They basically get named by somebody else that helps you out. So. Orthophytum, Orthophytum vagans. Yes, the foliage really is that red, and the flowers are really that white. So, and you can tell this is a perfect flower, because you got both stamens and a pistil, single pistil. So that's always a dead ringer saying that it's a perfect flower. This particular plant's fairly inexpensive. You can buy for $8 just about anybody online. If you don't have really high light levels, it might be all green. But when you put it in on full sun, you can get this beautiful red coloration. The genus Syncorea. This is a species which is fairly recently named. A lot of the bromeliads, just like in a lot of the families of plants, there's DNA sequencing going on. And they tend to regroup plants based on the DNA sequencing. And this is one that used to be in the family of Hectias, but they found out that it really doesn't fit in there. So it's been done differently. This is a picture from Brazil showing the rock outcroppings, and here's the two bromeliads, Syncorea burley marxii. And yes, you're right. There was a Hectia burley marxii as well, but that's because Roberto Burle Marx was a very famous person in Brazil. He was an architect and a plant person, and I was fortunate enough to meet him in 1992 when I was down there. But they're beautiful when they come into bloom. This is Syncorea alii. Exceptionally beautiful. It's probably about 15 inches in diameter. This is a larger grower, Burgundy Thrill. It's a hybrid. One of my friends from Tropiflora Nurseries in Sarasota holding this. And I think he's grimacing because of the spines that are raking across his arms as he's trying to hold this thing up. Syncorea helenicia. This grows on very steep rock. You know, remember the picture I showed you of the deuteraconia on that sheer face, rock face? This kind of thing this will grow on. So you see crevices, and these things will have been rooted into the crevices, growing in full sun. And this very beautiful new species from Bahia, Brazil. Bahia is one of the very dry territories of Brazil. So how do you grow these things that I presented? And then I'm going to do this part, and then I'm going to switch and talk about Tillandsias, which is another whole genus of things. I use totally plastic pots only because they're easier to clean. They don't tend to break if you drop them. But for succulents and the dry growers, you'd be just as well off to use a clay pot. They work just fine. And you would use the same potting mix you would do for any of your cactus or succulents. I had one person I asked that grow these, and they said, well, they use half a mixture of pumice and large perlite or compost with it. Another one said, just use a gritty gravelly mix. And either one will do just fine. If you have a mix that is gravelly, don't use play box sand. Use something that's got differences in size to the grains. Usually it's called builder's sand. What I do is hold the plant in place when I put it in, because they usually don't have many roots. In fact, the couple that these were sent to me this spring, and I had a guy from California send them to me. And they came, and if I was lucky if they had one single little root hanging on it. So to keep it in place, what I do is I put the plant down into the gravel mixture or whatever, and then I take two little bamboo sticks and just crisscross them across the plant and stick them in. And it just hold anything to hold it in place so that it doesn't continually uproot. And it'll go ahead and root on its own. You pull them out and you're good to go. Water once weekly during the summer at the most, and once every 3 to 4 weeks in the winter. Is that about what you do with your succulents and cacti? Or do you water them more often? I guess it depends. I'll water more often if you use a fast draining mix than if you have one that'll hold moisture. Just keep that in mind. Really weak strength of fertilizer, and only during the summer, really warmer months. Never fertilize in the winter time on this. And if you use a saucer under the pot and the inside only, if there's water that is in it after you've watered, dump that water out. And you don't want them sitting in water. They're not going to be very happy about it. These that I have on the table, I had them outside all summer long, and it was fairly dry this year. I had a lot of trouble keeping my 2-acre landscape garden watered. These things were no problem, and not even any of my bromeliads, because once I water them, the other types of bromeliads, which are the tank type, hold water in their leaves. So I only had to water them about once a week at the most, and then they were just fine. Normal house temperatures or outside in the summer is just fine. If you're going to grow them outside, make sure you acclimate them as you take them out. They may be desert plants, but they do not like to be moved from indoors to outdoor full sun. They will sunburn just like you do. So move them, put them in a semi-shady spot, let them acclimate, and then move them further and further out into the sun. Many of them can be grown in absolutely full sun. The Dickeas, Hecteas, Syncoria, they're all full sun plants. And repot only when the outgrow or when you want to give somebody an offset. And this is especially true on these because every time I handle these things, I wind up with scars on my hands. I mean, these are not user-friendly plants. I'm going to talk about a different genus here called Tillandsia. Now, Tillandsia is interesting because there are wet-growing Tillandsias, there are dry-growing Tillandsias, and there's things in between. It's such a large family, a large genus of plants. They grow terrestrially, xerophytic, or epiphytic. Epiphytic means you can find them attached to branches of trees, shrubs, things like that. They occur from Mexico through to South America. Actually, they start out in the US because Tillandsia, Spanish moss is in fact a Tillandsia, and there's other ones in Florida. The leaves are untired. They're smooth. Yay! You don't get killed handling these things. This is a very beautiful plant. This is Tillandsia tectona. You see this one sometimes in the stores for sale. It has these very, very silvery trichomes, weighs nothing. I mean, you can grow anywhere from about the size of your fist up to the one, I've got one there on the bottom that gets to be about this long. So there's a coalescent type that is available. I'm gonna talk about this one river valley. This is small map of a portion of Ecuador, down in the southern part of Ecuador. And this river, the Jubone River, goes inland almost 100 miles to an area called Onia. And I'm gonna show you some pictures of France from down in this area. Now, this is a very interesting setup because every evening, fog from the coast makes its way inland on this river valley, all the way into the center of the country. And the only reason these plants are able to grow in this very dry environment is because of that fog that comes in on almost a nightly basis. So let's look at some of this. Here's the river valley itself. This is the town of Onia, and the river actually is down in that very deep valley. And that's a very dry area, but all of the stuff that you see here is rocks. That's just pure granite rocks. So there's not a lot of vegetation that grows on. This is what it looked like in the morning. That's the fog that came in. And that's why all of these plants grow. There's cacti that grow there. There's a couple of very beautiful ones. This one on the right, the Trichoceros, is a large cactus. It grows to 24, 30 feet tall. And the flowers are quite large. A very, very beautiful thing. Another cactus, this is Espotoa lanata. That's these growing here. Interesting part of this, I don't know if you can see it, but the flowers only occur on one side of the cactus. That's it. And I don't understand why that is, but that's what it does. All the rest of this stuff that's silvery up in the trees up in there are tillandsias. So you've got tillandsias that grow up in there. Some of them grow on the cactus themselves. And then these other plants on the ground are Puya lanata. And I'll show you what those things look like. They're also familiar. This is one of them that you find in that valley. This is Tillandsia cerulea. These things will grow to a ball about this size. And there may be 400 or 500 plants in that ball. It has a very beautiful blue flower, and it's extremely fragrant. The year I was there in June of 2015, you got into that valley, and it just was, the entire valley was perfumed because every plant was in bloom at the same time. And there were just tens of thousands. A different type of Tillandsia divaricata. This is one of the xerophytic plants. You can see it's just literally has its roots attaching itself to the rock. It does not absorb any nutrients through the roots. It absorbs everything through the leaves itself. So all of this junk that you see in here is what feeds the plant. That's leaves and dirt and everything that just gets blown in there. And as it rots and decays, the trichomes on the leaves absorb the nutrients. So that's where it gets all of its nutrients. But if you pour water on that, it doesn't hold any water at all. It just drains right through it. It only takes the water up through those silvery trichomes on the leaves. Here's a close-up of one of the hillsides there. That little fuzzy plant I showed you. Well, here's hundreds and thousands of them right here. And these things are also bromeliads, but they're a different form of tillandsia called Limanii. And I'll show you. Those plants are big. They're 4 feet across. So they're this size. That's a lot of plant. And then there's various other things that are growing in there as well. This is Tillandsia limanii. That plant probably weighs, first of all, it's what they call a tank type. So those wide leaves are funnel shaped. And down when they overlap at the base, they actually become so that they'll hold the water there. And these plants, after an occasional rain they do get, will hold up to 5 gallons of water in their leaves. So they weigh a lot. You have a question?
Is that a cactus that's
Yep.
grown down in between?
That's one of the Apuntia However,
Is
is that how you-
that at the inflorescence on the other, on the left?
yes, there's two red inflorescences on here. The one up here at the top and the other one over here, and that's the Tillandsia divaricata that I showed on the previous slide. So they all grow intermixed among each other.
What's drooping on the one leaf?
Pardon?
What succulent is drooping? Or is
This,
that,
this is
yeah.
this is the inflorescence
Okay,
of this
okay.
plant. So it comes out and it flowers over a very long period of time and sends out thousands and thousands of seeds. The seeds look like dandelion seeds. So they've got a tail on them and they'll get dispersed in the wind that way. The Dickeas and Hecteas actually have seeds that are more like, how would you describe them? They have no appendages to them. So they look like a normal asparagus seed or something that you might just get in a pack. And you can grow them very readily from seed. Another one of the dry growing Tillandsias. This is a big plant. This plant is about this tall. So it has these purple flowers and it too will also set seed and have plumose seeds. A different type of Tillandsia. This again is still one of the drier growing ones in that same valley. These all grow together in the same area. This is one called Hiroi after my friend Takizawa Hirosama in Japan. And he discovered this along with my good friend from Ecuador a few years ago. But you can see all the flower parts over there on the left, and that one little spot of nectar that's on the end that attracts the hummingbirds to come get that nectar and then pollinates it. Tillandsia hitchcockiana, you can see it actually growing on cactus. So it doesn't necessarily need a rock or anything else. It can just attach right to the cactus. And it gets this beautiful pink spike and it will have purple flowers on it as well. And Tillandsia walteri. This one again is one, looks like a funnel form rosette, but it doesn't really hold any moisture. You put water in and it comes right out through it. And notice all these small plants here. These are seedlings of this. They take a very different looking form when they're small. And as they develop a much wider leaf and many fewer leaves. It's a very interesting species. This is a rock wall that was in Peru. This is down around Machu Picchu, the Inca ruins. And you can easily tell that there are Bromeliads. These are Puyalanadas. No, this is Puya. Shoot, I can't think of the name. There's one in bloom up here. And then there's Tillandsias scattered down along there as well. One of the Tillandsias that was there is Heliacea. Tillandsia nana. A lot of these are small and they're about the size of some of the ones that are on the pieces of driftwood that I brought here. So they're usually only 3-4 inches. So they're not very big plants and you can grow them easily. They will always bloom once and then you will get offsets, which is why you get big clumps of these things. Tillandsia caulifera. Again, it's a coalescent species, so it's got a long stem and it continues to grow. And a fairly rare plant, Tillandsia hildi. That's this plant with the barred leaves here. This is again one of these rock mountain walls that occur in Peru. Peru has a lot of steep area and a lot of it is dry. The last genus I'm going to cover, one called Puya. This is that I have now. that was taken in 1995, I believe, and it's in Ecuador. These group of plants are spiny, and I list them as a dry grower because they grow at high elevations. Typically, plants at those high elevations don't get a lot of moisture, and they get a lot of high wind. They're up at 3,000 meters, that's 10,000 feet. And it goes all the way to 3,400 meters, which is about 12 to 13,000 feet. That's a lot of elevation. And hiking up there is not fun. Somebody always has breathed all the oxygen out of the air before I get there. Because there's not enough to support me. These things usually have very wicked spines. They have beautiful flowers. Again, you have these fuzzy trichomes on here. The purpose of those is to help insulate the plant from the cold nights. It goes below freezing every single night. So it goes down below freezing for a couple of hours and then it warms back up. And it never usually gets above about 60 degrees at the maximum. Sometimes only 50, 55. They grow big. This is a bad picture of Puya Raymondi. This is the largest bromeliad in the world. It grows to 45 feet tall. That spike that you see on there has upwards of 100,000 flowers. Blooms over an entire year. And it lives to be 60 to 80 years old. This is a monocarpic species. Monocarpic means that the plant propagates only from seed. It does not produce any offsets at all. So this plant, once it flowers and sets its seed, it will eventually decline and just die. There are no offsets. So the other plant there is grown from seed. And these plants are probably 60, 65 years old before they bloom. Takes that long for them. This is a smaller one. This one's only about that tall. So it's only about 18 inches high, grows on the grassy paramos, which is above the tree line, at about 12,000 feet in elevation. And it, again, has these spines. The Puya Raymondi also has spines. And the interesting thing of Puya Raymondi, let me see if I have. Oh, this is, I'll cover this one. This is a brand new Puya that we found in June of 2015 and had actually beautiful flowers, these amethyst flowers. And again, you can see the fuzzy trichomes that help to protect the flowers from the freezing. This is what the rosettes look like. This is looking down on top of a Puya. This is about 6 feet in diameter. And the interesting thing on this plant is the spines face both inward and outward, and they alternate. So there's reports that animals will try to eat these things. I mean, food is scarce sometimes. If they get into these things, they can't get out. They just get in further and they wind up dying. And of course, when they rot, they produce lots of nutrients for the plant itself. So they can't call them carnivorous, but they basically benefit from the fact that they have these spines. And typically it's smaller animals, but large animals can get caught in these.
What's the origin of the genus Puya, the etymology of it? Is that a local name?
I don't know specifically. It's obviously a member of the, it's in the Pitcairnioideae family. So there's 3 major subfamilies. There's the Pitcairnioideae, there's the Bromeliads, and then there's the Tillandsioideae family. So they're in the one with all the Hectias and Dickias and things like that. But I don't know the actual origin of that in the long term. Sometimes there's been one report that the oldest forms of bromeliads are those that are found on the Chapuis in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And they are themselves carnivorous plants. And they're very acid environments, bog-like environments on these flat tepuis. And they're the Bromeliads. They're in the genus Bromeliad. And these are in the same family. This is a picture of the fog layers that was coming in from the coast in the evening. A very beautiful type thing. And you can get some spectacular sunsets. So with this, that's the end of my official talk. What I will do is take and have somebody flip on the light back there, and I'll take and entertain some questions, and then I'll talk about a little bit about some of the plants that I brought with me. You're probably all tired of hearing me talk, but I'm not done yet. This is the typical bromeliads that you see in plant centers, and you'll see large varieties of these in hotels and lobby of hotels and things. And these are almost always the genus line. Require water. They hold water. Which make great plants for the lobbies of hotels and things. They can water them once a week, once every 2 weeks, and they hold up for months and months at a time. But those are the wet growers. As I said, this plant is orthophytum, and its typical bloom that's on it. This bloom spike should have been up like this, but it's gotten bent over time and sitting down. I have several dichias here, and this is one of the orthophytum Gerkenians. And this group of plants here, the spiny ones, I'm gonna choose names out of there, and you can come up and choose a plant of your own. That Onia river valley I told you was so dry. This is one of the plants that grows on the rocks faces. Very small. And it's an incredibly dry grower, has a very fragrant yellow flower that it gets on. Spillanzia humilis. I brought this simply as an example of how they can grow into a ball. This started with one single plant attached to this wire, and I've had this clump now for about 10 years. And it now has, I don't know what, maybe 50, 60 plants on there, and you can see them, some of them in bloom.
So it's just a plant, you never had a form under it or anything, it just kind of keeps.
I glued it to the piece of wire.
Oh, just to a piece of wire, wow,
That's all that's under there is a piece of wire.
that's beautiful.
I've had it for more than 10 years, because it used to be twice that size and then it broke in half. And it grew back out again into a ball. They'll always grow in a ball shape because they're trying to get as much air circulation and light as they can. So the things on the inside tend to die away, but their stems are still there. So it just continues to kind of grow out. So you ask, how does something like this live? Well, you have to spray these. And I use a mixture of fertilizer in the summertime and spray it with a half-strength solution once a month. So it just grows like that. Everything on here came from that Onia River valley. And there are 5 different species of Tillandsias on here. This is the big Tillandsia tectorum type species. Little small thing like this is Tillandsia bailey. It's not rooted in here very well. And then you'll see, if you look closely up on here, you'll see these things on the edge. These are seedlings. Because it turned out that one of the plants up here set seed, and the seed just fell down onto this, and they simply germinated and started to grow. So that's exactly how they get onto cacti and everything else. And they don't care what they get onto. these stoloniferous plants up here in the top are Talentsia espinosa, and they grow in a different dry valley. Talentsia tectorum, again,
You
And
got one
Tillandsia
here with
Bailey.
really long leaves on the side.
I'm sorry.
You got one plant with really long leaves.
Yeah, this is Tillandsia bulbiciana. This actually grows in Florida. Which is interesting because I grow it as a dry grower, but it just, and it's and you notice some of these plants, they don't care what the orientation is. They don't necessarily, this one likes to grow up. So as it got heavier, it kind of kept curving and trying to go up. But you have other plants that were like the ball shaped one over there, and they don't care what orientation it is. They can grow upside down or sideways. It doesn't matter. And then last, I have this piece of wood. I have several different Tillandsias on here, but you can see that they have very beautiful flowers and very easy to care for. I mean, these plants, if they're on here long enough, and I've had them outside where there's some moisture, they will root just to hold themselves on here. But everything, all of their nutrients come from the silver trichomes on the leaves. So that's all I have. Questions?
A quick question about wet bromeliads.
Okay,
Do you ever have to water the bracing roots? I mean, the roots?
yes.
Okay,
It's a lot of the wet growing ones actually have roots that take up nutrients and moisture.
okay,
Not always, but most of the time they will take up both through that and through, they're not silvery, but they do have cells that will absorb nutrients that are in the leaf axils. So as debris gets down into these leaf axils and decays, they can actually absorb some of their nutrients through the leaves. And then the rest of it, they can absorb through the root structure. And I use, when I grow the wet growing ones like this, I use a mixture that's about a third coarse perlite, really coarse, up to 1 inch in diameter. And wood chips. I use pine bark. Just isn't the greatest, fir bark's better, but pine bark works okay. And then the other part, third, is usually sphagnum moss. And either the milled type, which I don't care for, or the long fibered. The long fibered is great for things that like wetness. And it holds up a long time, and it still allows air to get in around the roots.
So what's the difference between the fir and the pine bark?
I'm sorry?
Why do you like fir bark rather than pine bark?
Pine bark. Bromeliads don't tend to like to grow on pine bark. They have some kind of a substance that they emit that doesn't, they don't particularly, what I use it for is for the coarseness of the media and allow it to drain a little better, but it still will hold some moisture. But it doesn't root very well on.
I've been to a tropical world before and it's a fun place. Is there someplace more local that sells more Tillandsias than that?
I don't know who sells them locally.
So it's mainly you just. have to
A Glass House Works used to carry some stuff, and I noticed somebody had a label on their Bill Burchie over here from Glass House Works, and you know, Tom and Ken, and of course Tom's passed away, but I don't know whether Ken's still down there now.
Passed away too.
He did.
Yeah, he passed away, I think, in April. And they are now, the property is now up for sale. They had a huge,
Yeah, they basically,
liquidation.
So nobody took it over.
Nobody took it
So-
over. Yeah, I think it was built into Ken's, after death thing.
I see.
To be liquidated.
Yeah. That's a shame. They were both real friends of mine. I used to trade with them and stuff, and they ran a really good
The
nursery.
website still stands for those of us who wanna redo or make sure we got all the labels right, but we see there's a. I mispronounce it, Gilbergia with your name on it, what's that?
Yeah.
Share,
Sure, yeah. It's one of the very few hybrids I ever made.
yeah.
And I did that mostly because I wanted to just dabble in what it was to like to grow things from seed. Bilbergias grew fast from seed. Acmeas grow fast from seed. Tillandsias are agonizingly slow. Some of the really big plants that if you get some of the Tillandsias that are mesic types that are like 4 foot in diameter, they'll take 10 to 12 years before you can get them to bloom. That's a long time. That's, I mean, I usually start with offsets because they grow much faster. If you can get offsets of this stuff. And, part of the problem I have is my collection has increased over the years. I've got about 400 species and stuff that I grow and multiples of some of them. And some of the plants are just too big. I have this penchant for beautiful big flowers, but unfortunately they come on big plants. So, if you've got a dozen plants that are this size, you can't fit those into a 9 foot by 15 foot greenhouse. They just start elbowing everything out of the way. So I tend to try to stay with some of the smaller things. And I grow so many plants in such a small area because I grow 3-dimensionally. I have not only bench space, but I have poles and I have pigtail hangers. And so I use the whole space. And probably the last 4 years, 5 years, I've gone to using supplementary lighting in the winter time. So I have ceramic metal halide lights that I use, and I have 3 of them in the greenhouse. And they take up 750 watts each, which sounds like a lot, but and they produce heat, which during the winter is a bonus for me because now I don't have to heat from by any other means. I use the heat from the lights to help heat the greenhouse, which gives me 2 benefits at once. But that's the only way I could grow that many plants in such a small area.
Ceramic metal halides?
Mhm.
How are they different than regular metal halide?
For regular what?
Than a regular metal halide?
Well, the regular incandescents, of course, you can't get enough light out of them. But
I've never heard metal halide being called ceramic.
yeah, they're the ceramic metal halide lights give you a truer light than the other type, and they're usually much more energy efficient at producing the light. So that's why I honed in on them. And if I were worried about the heat, then I would just switch over to LEDs. Because they're coming down in price. They produce a lot of light with much less electricity. But they've been pretty expensive up till recently.
And they don't produce as much heat, so you're gonna lose that.
I'd lose that. So I'm using electricity for something else and rather than heating. So
Yeah.
and it's interesting because the ceramic metal halide lights were really developed for the marijuana industry. And that's what they used to grow with.
How many feet do you have metal halide away from the plants?
How far?
Yeah.
Some of them are about this close, but typically I have to watch because some of the plants that don't like a lot of light, I have to keep them about at least 2 feet away. And then other ones, I have some of my really big tillandsias I have on the floor of the greenhouse only because there's so much weight in those. They weigh 40 pounds a piece probably, and you can't hang them on anything. There's just too much weight there. But they are spectacular when they bloom.
Probably about 4 of the little air plants at home. And I've been just dunking them in water to water them every so often.
You use what kind of water?
Just regular water and I just dunk them in there.
Instead of
leave them in there for
misting,
about
just sort of
15 minutes.
That's-
But
Drop them in a bucket.
I've read different things about spray, misting them versus dunking them. So what is the best way to water?
Well,
plants?
occasional dunking is really good.
Okay.
If you're using tap water from the city of Columbus, please let it sit for a couple of hours before you use it.
Yeah.
Not chlorine in the water that helps you and fluorides aren't very beneficial for the plant. They're downright nasty. So always let them sit. And if you're gonna dunk them and you dunk them, let's say, once every 2 weeks or something, just put a little bit of fertilizer. in. That's a fantastic way of growing. And because they will absorb so much nutrient, you can leave them in there for several hours.
Yes.
It's not a problem. And just let them really soak it up and then take them out and let them drain.
Yeah.
Put them over a bed.
Take it off and-
Yes,
Yeah.
just, and that's one of the problems I had this summer with it. Everything was so dry. Even some of the dry growing plants. I like to occasionally really get soaked, and there was no soaking moisture this year. There just wasn't, nothing. It was really, really dry for us. You all lived through it, so you know. So I wound up occasionally going out and setting up a sprinkler on some of the stuff I had outside, and I would let it run for an hour. And it wasn't because I'm trying, just because I wanted it to have hot water for a complete hour and let it absorb as much stuff as it possibly could. But you can mist them. I found misting to be hard. Because if you've got it up on a wall, you're misting the wall as well.
I run up in the butter too at times, so.
So taking them off and dunking them works just fine. These are so big, in my greenhouse, I just hit everything in sight. I mean, I just turn on the hose and I agree, I always water with rainwater. I have a cistern underneath the floor of my greenhouse. And so water from my roof, on one section of my roof goes down into the cistern, and I use really clean water. And then I have an injector system in the greenhouse that will inject my fertilizer solution. And I water more or less, I fertilize more or less all the way around and every time I water, but it's a really, really weak solution.
2 questions. One, what type of fertilizer do you use? And 2, if I was randomly out walking around at a store and I see some really cool bromeliads, how do I tell which ones are the wet growers and which ones are the dry growers?
Good questions. I use Peter's 20-20-20 water soluble. And the only thing I don't like about it is the blue dye color in it. If you water with it a lot, the blue dye color will show up. And plus, when you're mixing it yourself, unless you wear plastic gloves, you're gonna get blue hands. But it is a wonderful fertilizer. Usually it has micronutrients in it as well, which is one of the reasons I use the Peters Professional if I can find it. Usually I get a bag of it that's a 20-pound bag and it lasts a long, long time. How do you tell the wet growers from the dry growers? Well, if it's got silvery leaves to it, it's a dry grower, whether it has a funnel shape or not. I showed some of those that even had what looked like, I'll use this near jelly here. This is what would be typically called a wet grower because of the fact that it's got these wide leaves. And if I tip this over, it probably has water in it. Okay.
It did, I think I tipped it on the way in.
So, it's easy to do. We can easily see the offsets on this particular plant. And I would take these off when it gets about this size. About a third the size of the mother plant. Or you can let this one go ahead, if it's already bloomed, let it have. But after it blooms, sometimes I'll let it decay a little bit and then I'll just clip it off and keep the 2 side shoots or 3 or 4 and wind up with a cluster. So you can grow it either way, it doesn't matter. But typically, these will flower only once in the center of the plant, and then that particular plant will die.
Any guess on the species?
This is Nerigelium. I can't tell you and whether it's a hybrid.
For that matter, yeah, that's always the
I
question.
know that's what it is. This is a Bilbergia. This is hybridized by Don Beadle, a friend of mine who passed away about 6 years ago. He was called Mr. Bilbergia because he did a terrific amount of hybridizing of Bilbergias. He grew every species of Bilbergia there was, as well as hybridized them. A really wonderful man. He created some beautiful Bilbergias. And this one I saw was Boquita moss, which is one of his. The other plant in here is a Cryptanthus. It's a terrestrial out of Brazil. And I don't know whether this is a hybrid or whether this is the novice.
It's a cultivar of some sort, whether or not it's been hybridized. I
It's
don't
probably
know.
a hybrid, but it's one of the,
that one came from Groovy Plants, and, I lost the tag. I want to say, I'm gonna mix it up, something like Black Soldier, but that's a name of, Kalanchoe, so
the interesting thing, I showed a slide that there was something like 3,700 species of bromeliads. There's about 15,000 cultivars that are named.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't need anything to name a cultivar. You can find something, and I kid people because the Nerigelias, there's some fabulous ones on the market. But some of them I would have called Nerigelia one more spot. Just because there's 1,000 and somebody got one that has 1,005 and they name it as something different.
Well,
Which is not the intent of the cultivar list.
no, and I suspect it happens, I'm sure it happens with cactus and it happens with these as well, where you got competing breeders and they just take something that's on the market and they put their own cultivar name
Right.
on it.
The other bad thing that happens is you get a lot of people that do hybridizing. And God bless them, they produce some absolutely fabulous plants. I mean, if it weren't for hybrids, we wouldn't have any plants in our landscape. Most of them are hybrids with one plant or another, or cultivars with one plant. But what happens is, since it takes anywhere from 3 to 10 years to get these things to bloom, once they bloom, the people look at them and go, okay, this one's really great. These other 999, they're all right. Well, what am I gonna do with them? So they decide they gotta make some money out of them, they sell them, put a name on it anyway. But now, the reputable hybridizers, the guys that truly make a living off of this, tend to destroy all of the plants that they hybridize. And they never let them reach market. Because they don't want their name associated with an inferior plant. So they keep the best and then they cross hybridize with that on the next generation. And those growers there's a few of them that are just world famous. I mean, they're like truly excellent hybridizers. They keep records of what's dominant and what's the opposite of dominant? Recessive. And which parts are recessive. So they know when they cross two plants, what to expect to get out of it. It's not always guaranteed, but they know, for instance, if one plant has a particular type of inflorescence and it's dominant, most of the crosses are going to have that kind of an inflorescence. So those are the people that really know what they're doing, but there's a lot of people that just dabble in it and want to put their name on something. There is a website, the bsi.org website. It's free, get on. It has identification on there. It has a list of all of the bromeliads and pictures of virtually all of them. And you can use that as a resource. Tropiflora Nursery in Sarasota is an excellent source of plant material. Dennis Cathcart, who has founded it and has run it his whole life, has been a friend of mine he went into South America multiple times every year, collecting material and bringing it in. He also was a collector of snakes. So he would go down and try to identify the snakes. I tried to stay away from them when I was in South America. If you get into the wet, warm, humid areas, snakes are very prevalent there. And there's a good number of them that are poisonous. And there's some very, very highly poisonous snakes. And there was never a year I went down there and didn't see a poisonous snake.
Venomous,
Venomous,
not poison.
venomous. They are venomous. Fertile ants in particular, I've seen, and bushmasters I've seen. So you hope you see them before they see you, and that you don't step on them. That's the biggest issue. Anything else?
Okay, I have a beginner question. I have a bromeliad, which is a wet variety. It different. I mean, and it blooms every year, usually more than one in fluorescence. If it dies back, I don't notice it. I mean, if that part dies, if that plant dies, or part plant, I don't notice it.
How long have you had it?
5 or 10 years.
Really? Would you do me a favor and send me a picture of it? And then I'll help you identify it. I'm curious because there are very few bromeliads that don't die after flowering because so many of them are terminal. That has to die. That's the Bilbergia pyramidalis. So it's related to the Bilbergia that's over there.
I've got that species, but I've got one that's variegated foliage. So,
It's probably a species, but it's just got variegated foliage.
right.
I mean,
It's
so a
just
lot of cultivars are in fact the species. They just have some unusual trait that people need. So and in particular, the variegated hybrids or variegated cultivars are beautiful. I mean, they're usually slower growing than anything else because they lack as much chlorophyll. But they are spectacular when they but that's the Bilbergia pyramidalis for sure.
But
and that's
And after that one inflorescence, if you tag that plant, it has to die within probably 3 years max.
yeah, I was saying, they don't go away immediately,
No,
but,
It takes a little while.
it
but
offsets so prolifically, you just don't
Correct.
notice, you
okay,
You
so
get
that
offsets.
part of it,
Yeah, see, if you look at this over here, I don't know, probably a third of those plants have been bloomed before,
oh, yeah.
and they're still there. But they won't bloom again, and eventually it will decay.
Yeah,
And-
the leaves will go
But
away.
the new offsets at the base will
Fill in.
continue to grow, give you new plants and more bloom.
so that's what's happening,
Mhm.
because I have enough new stuff, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
don't notice
Yeah.
the part that died.
Yeah. You don't notice it, but and usually you get one leaf at a time
Yeah,
that
right.
dies until you
Right.
get down to
Until
the point where.
Right, the
Falls apart.
rosette is gone. Yeah.
How long does it usually take for the parent to die after flowers? It's not like a few weeks, it's.
No, sometimes they'll hang on for 2 or 3 years.
So
Sometimes,
that
only-
might be what's going on.
sometimes only 1 year.
And by that time, I have a new part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And probably the new parts it probably blooms every year because one of the offsets is a year or 2 old and it goes out and blooms. So it looks like it's always in bloom. I've had plants that actually, the fastest plant that I've ever had go from an offset to bloom took 9 months. That's fast. And that plant grows this tall with its inflorescence.
Oh, my.
But after it flowers, I'll see a new offset start, and 9 months later, that plant will bloom. And that's really fast. That's really, really fast for bromeliads. Most of them take a couple of years. There are some bromeliads that I grow that bloom only once every 5 years. And when they bloom, every plant in that area will bloom at exactly the same time. It's like they're coordinating. And you find that in the wild. And they do that because, you have to oftentimes have two plants of different seed to get cross pollination. If you, let's say your clump, if you, each plant that comes off is an identical of the one that was there. It's genetically identical. In some species, you would never get any seed set, even though you have multiple flowers. And even though you have both pistils and stamens, because it requires two different seed plants to cross.
You're saying they don't sell.
They don't sell,
Most cacti are the same way.
so. And I have quite a few Tillandsies that are like that. But you have so many plants out there, there's thousands. You've seen some of those pictures. When you see them, you see a mass of things, and they're all flowering at the same time. So the hummingbirds, when they come, they can pollinate, cross-pollinate that stuff. And occasionally you'll get hybrids forming in the wild. Some of the Tillandsias will cross-pollinate, and you'll get natural hybrids.
Well, that brings up a question with the seedlings you got on those Tillandsias.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you were pollinating them, so, you have absolutely no idea, did they sell or did they cross with who knows what?
Yeah, and it could be hybrids, but I would bet that they're species.
Okay.
Because some of the plants, you can try to cross them and they may not be, cross fertile.
Compatible.
They just won't take. And other ones will. It's hard to tell which one's which. But if you ever get a bromeliad and you want to know how to grow it or you can write to me on email. Just use my name, Jerry Raack @gmail.com. And I'll be glad to write back and tell you what I think it is. And if it can get one in flower, it's better than just the foliage. Well, thank you all for coming and taking a time out of a beautiful day outside.
So this is a fabulous project. Did everybody that wanted to sign
Oh.
in for the door prize?
Yeah.
So if you haven't.
If you're signed in,
prize,
I'm going to
please
give
send it.
away these plants that are here that in this one grouping. And what I'll do is I'm gonna take them and choose them. I really don't know any of your names. So I'm simply gonna choose the name and you come up and take your choice out of whatever's left. Okay.